Well, okay, so this is part 2. I'm going to suggest that you follow along on Google Classroom. It's from our textbook, Spotlight Canada, that I've uploaded. This is Spotlight Canada part 2. We're moving along here, page 227. So I'll suggest that you stop here and go onto Google Classroom and find Spotlight Canada part 2, and then scroll to page 227 and follow along. I think should help. So I'll pause for a moment here. Dun, 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 dun. You can hit the pause and then we'll... Alrighty, so page 227. Canadian preparations. When Canada declared war in 1939, there were only about 10,000 soldiers in its armed forces. For much of the Depression years, the government had reduced military spending. In 1938-39, the budget for defense was only $35 million. In 1939, the Canadian Army possessed only 14 tanks, 29 Bren guns, 23 anti-tank rifles, and 5 small mortar guns. The Canadian Navy had just 10 operational vehicles, and the Royal Canadian Air Force had only 50 modern aircraft. Not much. Though largely unprepared for war, Canada was quick to respond. At this point, the government hoped that Canada's role would be limited. Our Prime Minister, Mr. King, thought in terms of sending maybe about 40,000 troops and acting mainly as a supplier of food and war materials to Britain. He didn't want the war to involve a costly expenditure of Canadian lives, and he wanted to avoid conscription at all costs. You may recall from World War I the term conscription. This is when the government actually forces citizens to go to war. Doesn't want to do that. Moving quickly, the government proclaimed the War Measures Act, which gave it sweeping powers, and turned to the task of preparing the materials of war. Orders were quickly placed for arms and equipment to bolster Canada's forces. Canadian factories began producing new aircraft. Flying bases were built on both coasts, and an air firing and bombing range constructed in Trenton, Ontario. To help finance these new war materials, a new series of war taxes was announced on September 12th. By the end of September, over 58,000 Canadian men and women had signed up for the armed forces. Many were unemployed men who were grateful for a new pair of boots, a warm uniform and great coat, 3 meals a day, and $1.30 a day paycheck. As in 1914, these recruits were all volunteers. However, they went off to war in a more somber mood than recruits in 1914. World War I hadn't been that long ago. People remembered how awful it was. On September 16, the first convoy left for England by ship. By January, 23,000 Canadian troops, mostly untrained, began arriving in Britain. Their general, the Canadian general in charge, said, "We've come here to do a job, then go home." The hope was that the war would be over quickly. Events would soon erase this hope. All right, so that's it. There'll be some questions below. Work on them, answer them, and it's all here in the text that I've written and that you followed along and read. And then send it to me when you're done. Take care.